Nobody else in chair.
Kindly mute your mic if you're not speaking so that there'll be less feedback. Are you all seeing the shared screen?
Yes.
Yes, I am.
Yes,
Great,
ma'am.
awesome. Right. Is it big enough, legible and everything?
Yes, it is. It's
Yes, it
good.
is. Yeah.
Great, awesome. Okay. So this course takes a point of entry into an understanding of the arts and culture having value beyond the traditional notions of the arts and culture. And when we say beyond the traditional notions of the arts and culture, I am particularly referring to the idea of the arts and culture being purposed primarily for aesthetic value. And what do we mean when I say aesthetic value? Anyone? When we talk about something having an aesthetic value or is valued for its aesthetic role, what are we referring to, really?
Really, the way it looks. So I kind of call it art for art's sake, just because of the beauty of
Yes,
it. Yeah.
yes, correct. That's Kevin.
Yeah.
Yes, that's correct. For its beauty and really for nothing else beyond that. And I suppose, in a sense, when one looks at the mild, it may be more, but I like to shut it out. The mild discussion that one is hearing out there around the fact that we're not having carnival next year. The way in which some people treat with that, it is clear that they only have a sense of carnival as having some kind of aesthetic value. You know, it's just for people to have fun and jam on the road and jam in a junction and bend down low and scoop back and all of that. And in some regards, some of them actually forget that within there's an even more important aesthetic value that the carnival has in terms of heritage and a contributor to our history and a way to showcase our traditions and so on and so forth. And so this course wants us not only to look at that and to interrogate that within the context of the carnival ecosystem or the festival ecosystem, but also in the broader context of the cultural and creative ecosystem to understand what really is this a value that the arts and culture have to society beyond the idea of aesthetic. Are we good so far?
Yes, miss.
Great. And so in that first paragraph, it really speaks to that and tries to identify quite succinctly what are some of the issues that we would treat with in trying to understand the value of the arts and culture to society beyond the aesthetic. So we want to look at notions of production and commodification and consumption. And we want to understand that interplay first broadly from a theoretical standpoint. And so we would first treat with those issues to understand what they mean conceptually and who are the key theorists to advance issues around that. Before then looking at it in terms of how it actually has operationalized in the global economy. And in certainly doing that, to have a sense of where we in the region locate within that dispensation before zeroing in on our Caribbean societies to understand what arts, culture, and society means. Most certainly within that, we would want to treat with a very important concept, creative and cultural entrepreneurship. And again, to understand how that can be used as a vehicle to penetrate and to realize some of what we would have treated with in our first module in terms of the arts and culture having value beyond the aesthetic notions that generally present themselves in our society. Any questions or comments so far?
Nope.
All right. And so therefore, class, as we treat with that, we of course have to be cognizant that there are certain structures that drive that idea of arts and culture having greater impact beyond the aesthetic. We want to look at the structural context of cultural industries and the idea of a cultural economy. And most certainly in terms of how we arrive at talking about these things before we can certainly examine how that cultural economy and this cultural industry concept, how those constructs actually contribute to Caribbean development, not just in terms of socio-cultural development, but most certainly in terms of socio-economic development. If there are any questions now, I would appreciate them or comments. Anyone? Okay, great. Not seeing any
One
hands. Yes,
question,
Emily?
real quick. This is related to the course, but not necessarily specific to the material. My question is, are we gonna have like 3-hour courses, classes, like forever? Like, would there be breaks in class?
Well, sometimes it won't go continuous like that. We do take a break in between, but
Okay.
you will be so surprised. The 3 hours is go so fast. You don't know me to be boring. You know me to be boring normally.
No, miss. Okay.
And the thing is, it's not me will be talking only. Y'all will be talking. Trust and believe. Remember, this is post-grad now. This is not undergrad. You know, we get to talk about anything we want to under the topic arts, culture, and society, according to whatever topic we're discussing. So sometimes the time goes quickly. But remember now we're on screen. I mean, I taught this last semester when we had to come come inside, you know, and our time really did go quickly. I mean, I suppose this is a good place to talk about class structure now. The course will be delivered not just in terms of formal lectures, but I do encourage discussion. I do ask a lot of questions because I like to hear where your mind is at. We will also have guest lecturers sprinkled in between. I like to get some very interesting and dynamic people. And because we're online, we are going to pull these people from across the region. You know, I like to get some superstars and whatnot inside up here. Um, and I like to choose them according to the topics, of course, that they can share something from their own experiences relevant to what we may have been discussing before they came into the room, or certainly as it links to the class before. We will also have presentations at times, and so that also will break up the monotony of just me talking. Most certainly won't happen. But yes, most importantly, we can certainly take a 10-minute break somewhere as we journey along the class. Today, I don't believe we will go until 9 because it's our first class. And I prefer this particular lecture as it's the introductory lecture. I like people to really contemplate on what we will discuss today. You will have some readings to go with it, so that you will have enough certainly to do between now and next week. Is that fair enough?
Definitely.
Yes.
That's completely fine.
Yes, miss.
Great, awesome. Good, I'm glad to hear that. Right. What are my house rules? I don't really have, um, I like, because I like the rich engagement and discussion. Um, you may use your show of hands, but if we can respectfully allow each other to speak before we take our turn, that's fine. If we're getting heated, well, we will raise the hands and I will referee. But most certainly, I want us to be comfortable. Of course, you could eat in my class, Snicker, as I told my undergrads this week. as long as you're paying attention, I'm quite fine. You know, most importantly, I encourage you to ask questions and to contribute. That way we know that we're all on the same page. I am also very open to, and I will tell you when we will do that, to one-on-ones, and that will come later on down in the course when we're treating with coursework. And of course, the way that that can be done is most certainly to either send an email or to send a WhatsApp, and we can certainly schedule that when that time comes around. Fair enough?
Yes, Miss.
So let us look now at our course requirement. Are we still seeing that quite clearly?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. So I believe in my discussion, I would have hinted at that in terms of mentioning that I do still structure my readings according to topic. And that's because I want you to have a firm grasp of the literature. We're postgrad, and so anything that we have to debate in the literal can certainly be supported by the theoretical or the conceptual. And so having a firm grasp of the literature will certainly help us to be able to argue convincingly and coherently what we are trying to articulate about this thing called arts culture and their impact on society. Performance in the course is 100%. I don't know if that's good news for you. For the last cohort, it was good news for them. This is usually a mixed course of coursework and exam. But of course, because of the pandemic scenario, I have shifted the course to 100% coursework. And your coursework is broken down as you are seeing there. 5% in class, 5% for participation. So yes, I like people to talk plenty. In-class presentation, 15%, essay submission, 20%, and a final coursework assignment that will be worth 60%. All written assignments are required to be typed and have proper referencing, no kidding. Now, you will receive the specific instructions as well as the rubric for evaluation for each of your components of assessment there, with, of course, the exception of participation. I think that goes without saying. And I do not overwhelm people in the sense that you will receive these components in a timely fashion with enough time to do the work. In some instances, depending on what is being done, there may be room for an extension. However, I prefer drafts that I can review and send you on your way to improve. Remember, we are in postgrad now, and this is a professional postgraduate diploma, and so you are also being trained to meet deadlines in a way that will be expected of you as a consultant. For those of you who may not be consultant, I know some of you would have started work in this regard, but we're talking now about consultancy now in this realm where you are being trained to be professionals, arts and cultural analysts of your ecosystem, and most certainly that of the Caribbean. So that we want to respect the thing called deadlines as much as we possibly can. We know there are circumstances that can occur and arise, and I am appreciative, sympathetic to these things. And so we can certainly have a discussion on those matters, but let us try as much as possible to meet the deadlines. Fair enough?
Yep.
Yes. Can
Yes,
I
ma'am.
thank
Yes.
wave
Yep.
of hands
Yes,
for
ma'am.
that since I have
Yes.
your
Yes.
recording? That could be my contract with
Yes.
you all.
Yes.
Great, lovely. All right. Last but not least, let us take a look at the course objectives so that you know what it is you're being asked to do.
Dr. Tall, before you get to the course objective,
Yes.
can you tell us what is the overall passing grade to pass the course itself?
Okay, and who is speaking? Is that Alicia?
Alicia.
Alicia. Hello, Alicia.
Hello.
Ooh, so postgraduate, the pass mark is 50%.
Okay.
So that means you have to do all my coursework.
Okay. Most definitely.
I'm glad you noted that math already. So I have to do all. You know, I nearly put it 50-50. I catch myself. I said, girl, you mad? So it's 50%.
Okay.
And people
Thank
tend to
you.
do well in this course. I mean, the last cohort, they did quite well. They did quite well. So I'm not expecting anything less. I'm not worried. Right? So at the end of the course, I don't think I necessarily want to go through that. I will ask of you to read through the objectives when you receive the course outline. If there's anything that you're not certain about, you can certainly shout me on a WhatsApp or wait until we return to class to ask me about it. But I more so would want you to have a sense of the journey ahead, as you see here, which is our course methodology and content. I don't know why it's saying methodology, but our course content, right? And the way in which we do it is that I have the course divided into 3 modules with an introduction and a closing lecture. And I suppose this is what we're doing right now. And I do the 3 modules because I've recognized it's greater in terms of comprehension to understand how we move from one level of the argument, because I've already said that this course makes as its point of entry that the arts and culture are not just simply about aesthetic as they relate to society. And so, in trying to share with you that argument that I have posited, I have structured my course into 3 modules, carrying you first from the theoretical foundations of that, then to the module 2, which looks at how the arts and culture operate in the global economy, before then moving on to module 3 to look at what operates in the Caribbean cultural economy. And that's where it gets really exciting, because that's where you get to present, and that's where we will also get some guest lecturers. The essay that you will write, chances are, will find itself located somewhere in module 1. And that's a way of me being sure that you understand the critical, theoretical, or philosophical foundation of the course. That I know then that you are most versed to be able to argue and to articulate, as I said, the realities or the literal, which is what we will be discussing from module 2 downward. In our closing lecture, Cultural Industries and Caribbean Development, the Way Forward, it is my hope, depending on where that date falls, that we will have either both or 2 persons who would have been founders in a sense to this course. Dr. Keith Nurse, who would have been one of the founders of the ACEM program, as well as Dr. Ralph Henry, who was the first person to create the course Economics of Culture at the University of the West Indies. And so they would have been some of the very early ones to treat with the idea of cultural industries having some kind of nexus with Caribbean development. I am hoping to have a third, which will be who I consider to be a very young person, to also treat with the way forward in terms of how younger academics are seeing us engaging with the cultural and creative ecosystem towards our Caribbean development in the future, especially now that we are in this context of a COVID. Be assured that as we go through the modules, we will not be teaching in a vacuum, and we will not be talking in a vacuum as if this COVID is not outside there existing. But certainly we will contemplate what all of this means for us as we push forward and try to understand the impacts of the arts and culture on society. Any questions or comments? Yes, Dominic.
Um, I was just wondering, apart from all of this, what referencing style do we use if it's still MLA 8?
Yes, as
Okay.
you are in the humanities still, even though it's a business course, you are still expected to use MLA. Even though you're in a business-like program, you're in the Faculty of Humanities and Education, so you will use MLE. And most certainly, when I give the first assignment of the essay for the benefit of your colleagues who may not be very familiar, I will not teach MLE, but I will certainly share with you the links and explain to you how you utilize the referencing style. Does everybody know what's MLA? Is there anyone here who does not know what is MLA? Okay,
No, I
right.
don't know.
Right. So
I don't
MLA
know.
Quincy is the referencing style that is used by the Faculty of Humanities and Education. A referencing style is a guide style as to how you document whatever you are writing. So, as you know, when you are writing papers, you may quote somebody or you may pull information from a source, so that when you are doing either of the two, you are expected to use what they call a referencing style. And in the Faculty of Humanities and Education, we use MLE. And so there is a guide. So that will tell you if it's a book, how that is to be referenced at the end of your paper, as well as if you directly quote, how you reference it within the paper. If it's a journal paper, how that looks. If it's a website, how that looks. If it's more than one author, how that looks. If it's a television program, how that looks. If it's a blog, if it's something on IG, because that's the word we know, how all of that looks. Okay, and so we would want to be sure that we are all equipped and armed with that, because yes, Dr. Tull takes off marks if you don't have your referencing style intact, because you're postgrad as well. You're supposed to be able to do these things properly. And if of course postgrad should choose to sample, to take a look at your work, it must be up to scrutiny. Fair enough. So we will learn more about that within, I would say, by the third week or so. We should certainly be talking about our essays. We will have our first two lectures, and then I will certainly send to you what will be your assignment for you, your first assignment for you to begin on. Any questions or comments at this time?
No.
No, none.
One is good. Okay, so I think this is a nice place to take a nice 2-3 minute break. Go get your snacks and water and juice and whatnot, and we will start at 6:40, and we will have our first lecture. Yes, are we ready?
Yes, we are.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, ready.
So, what is culture and the arts? If you may, take a moment to consider the various ways of defining culture. Let's hear. What are some of the ways in which you would define culture? Let's hear.
A way of life.
Oh gosh, Julian, start there.
I just do it for spite.
Culture is a way of life, boy. Yes, yes, yes. And when people say culture is a way of life, let me pull up the chat so that we can also engage with the chat if you want to. When we say culture is a way of life, what are the assumptions being made there about culture being perceived as a way of life? Let me see if I can my blackboard. That's here.
I think
Uh,
it's because it tends to relate to some of our practices, norms, um, or the way or things that people would have done in the past in order to survive.
So let's hear that again. Relate to, tends to relate to.
Practices, norms, rituals, etc. that would have practiced prior to now. That was key to survival of the human race, more or less.
All right. That is part of it. So culture as a way of life, giving reference or context to heritage and history. Right. Okay. What else? I'm trying to see if I could work this blackboard. The technology wants to baffle me. What else? So culture as a way of life. Yes, Patreon.
Culture also extends to our social behaviors, the foods we eat, the particular foods we eat, the foods we drink, some of our habits, be it religious habits, financial habits, social habits, emotional habits. Um,
Right.
so
Right.
we-
Good. I see James in the chat say how we dress, how we speak, what we eat.
yes, I was
Okay.
going to speak about the way we dress as well. That also ties into culture.
So I believe, is it Tony or Patreon that just made mention of how we behave? Did anyone talk about that? How we are, how we behave? Can we consider what's one of the things that Trinidadians do that reflects culture, that has become a cultural norm, so to speak? Seeing Tanya's hand up, I'm seeing who else? Roxanne, I'll come to that point just now.
Should I
What's
go?
one of the things that Trinidadians do
Should I go?
that has become part of your cultural norms? That's part and parcel of Trini culture.
Lime.
Lime, corrective.
Lime.
Oh gosh, that's right. Lime. As a matter of fact,
Lime by the pavement, lime on the pavement as well.
Lime wherever.
you know the word lime is a Trini word. It's Trinidadians who created the word lime. The
Yeah.
idea of lime is
Mhm.
very synonymous. I don't think you hear people in the Caribbean say they're going and hang out. Do Caribbean people say that? I go in and hang out. How does that sound? Sound like going
No,
and hang out clothes.
that's American.
Here, Roxanne said nevers. That's right. They say they're going to lime, and that came from here. What's another
Mhm.
thing that y'all do? That's become a cultural practice.
The way in which we speak.
Hmm. Yes, the way in which you speak. One of the things that Trinidadians do sometimes, you all repeat certain words. Gade, 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 gade. Nobody else in the Caribbean does that. Or what about na, 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 na? So these are things that have become part and parcel of culture. Then we have what Roxanne has put in the chat. Most importantly, as well, customs and traditions. Yes, over exaggeration. That's right. Well, Barbadians do that as well. You know, you would hear them say somebody is a proper puppet. I mean, if you're a puppet already, like you need to be proper as well. So in the Caribbean, there are ways in which we use the language of emphasis in a way to over exaggerate is correct. But then coming back to Razan's original statement, the initial statement, customs and traditions. So this idea of way of life, even though that's where Jillian put us, we can certainly disaggregate that to get a clearer and more focused understanding of what we mean when we say culture. Agree?
Yes.
What then do we mean when we say arts? Are culture and the arts the same? Let's take a vote.
No.
No.
Go out one time.
I think culture refers to the intangible stuff, and arts refer to the tangible stuff.
Wow. Okay, Jillian, hold that thought. Anyone else agrees with that? So,
I don't know if
so
I
culture refers to, let me get it right. Let me get it right. Culture refers to the intangible,
The the intangible. Mm-hmm.
and the arts refer to the intangible. How
To the
many people agree
tangible.
with that? Is anyone have a
no, no,
varied idea
the
of
arts
how
refer
to
to the
look at
tangible. She said the arts
The
refer to the
arts is
tangible, right?
tangible.
the
Mm-hmm.
arts
And
is
Yeah, and
tangible and the culture is intangible?
culture intangible. Yeah.
the
Anyone else
arts,
agrees
see,
with that or has a varied perspective to that? Let's get them all. So let's put them here in the chat. So let me get it right. Culture is intangible, correct?
Yes, culture is intangible.
Okay. And arts is tangible. Okay, is there another view?
Yeah.
That's it. So that's perspective one.
Okay. I would say that the arts are as we were saying, they are the aesthetic elements that are developed as a result of
I'm
the
not hearing you
culture.
so clearly. That's Kevin talking there.
Yeah, you hear me?
Could you speak up a little bit more? I'm
You hear
having
me
a
better
little.
now?
Oh, perfect. Go ahead.
Okay. I would say that arts are the elements or aesthetic products that are produced as a result of the culture of whatever place it is.
Okay. So the arts are elements of aesthetic products of the culture,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
All right. Anyone else with a varied perspective? Try and have your perspective in our comment, and then you have to vote on this.
I think culture is the agreed collective practice by which one or many can be identified.
That's
And
now. So
sorry,
culture is
culture is the agreed collective practice
ah
by which one or many can be identified. And I think art is what we practice. There's a
I see my A has been sticking. All right. Collective practice.
by which one or many can be identified.
Mm-hmm. And what is the arts?
I think art is what we practice, the things that we
Art.
do, the things, yeah, the tangible stuff now that what we practice.
Mm-hmm. Sounding, Julian, like you have somebody there with you, girl. Anyone else? One more taken.
I hope I'm not jumping anyone. My perspective, I see both art and culture as being both tangible and intangible, for the fact that they both have aspects in which we can hold and we cannot hold. And in a sense, art is more of an expression and it can be influenced by culture.
Okay, so art is an expression that can be influenced by culture. Let me hear what you say, cultures. These are
Well,
very good, by the way.
I was saying both art and culture, I believe they are both tangible. They both have tangible and intangible aspects. So
All
that
right.
they both absorb each other. Whereas more art is sort of more influence, it tends to feed off more of culture. So it tends to express culture more. Art tends to be an expressive part of culture more in a sense.
Who is this talking here?
Patriarch.
Patreon. Very nice. Okay. Well, let's get the views of your colleagues now on what we have here. And let me just finish Patreon's point. Arts are the expressive realm, can I put it like that, of culture?
Yes, it's like an expressive outlet of culture.
All right. Gotcha.
Wow.
Is everyone seeing the chat now? I just noticed a few little
No,
comments.
I'm not seeing it either.
Can
Let's
you
see.
go?
Neither am I. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to cut this and put it in the main thing then. Maybe it will,
Okay.
so that we can see them all. But you're supposed to be able to see, and this is what I keep saying about this platform, because what's the sense of saying we'll be on it if the students can't see? Because I notice you all, even though you're using your UW, I think it's still you all are still showing up as guests. And I
Yeah,
don't I
that
don't
I think
understand
that's what it's saying when we try to
Yes,
see
that's
it, that we're a
when we
guest.
tried to log. When I tried to log in as and with my UE email, I had to click on the guest,
so
the
so
guesting
when
to access this.
so let me ask you something. As Roxanne, everybody was commenting here, y'all weren't seeing what each other was typing?
No, I saw what they typed,
No.
but I didn't see what you typed.
For real?
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Madness is that.
No, I haven't been seeing
But
anything,
then
so I just
people
been going with
I,
the
I,
guess.
like
I not see
People
I not see
typing
nothing,
things.
period. So, yeah,
Yes,
I
people
didn't know
typing
people type
things.
it.
All I'm
Man,
seeing
it's
on
real
my screen
I
is
don't know.
man,
point
it's
of
real
departure.
action going here. This fun. That is crazy. Let
What
me
I'm
see if there's
what I'm
anything.
seeing is the point of the part. You take a moment to look at that screen. I don't know.
Right. Well, I going on drop the, oh, sorry. I'll go and drop the, I'll try and just create a um slide here and just drop it there. Then everybody will be able to see it. See, easy as that.
Mhm.
Yeah, have to really learn how to be flexible with these things, eh?
Mhm.
Right. So we all seeing that now, eh?
Mhm.
Right. So let's talk about it. So we have the question that was asked is there a difference between the arts and culture? We define culture and we clearly understand what culture is. And I posited the question, can we actually see there being some kind of distinction between the arts and culture? And we got some very interesting perspectives here. And I'm
Mhm.
seeing here the first one that Jillian presented was the idea of culture on the one hand being intangible and seeing the arts as intangible. What do you think about that basic segmentation? Is that entirely true?
No, it is not.
Let's
Um,
hear you, Dominique.
it can't be true because um, its culture is intangible and arts are tangible, right? Well, everything that is artistic is not necessarily tangible. Well, that's the first thing. And everything in culture is not necessarily intangible because we can see in certain situations where different objects hold specific meaning to a society. So that is part of culture. So we can't necessarily say, well, these two belong in these particular boxes. It's
So
too.
just to be sure that we're all clear, what would be an example of an element of culture that isn't intangible? And I suppose this Roxanne could come in here. Yes, go ahead, Maria. That was the
Oh,
hint. Go ahead, Maria.
I, I was saying our dress, our food, those are things you could see. That's really tangible, I guess.
Sorry, I'm not hearing you clearly. Go ahead, say that again, please.
Sorry, I said like we said that part of culture could be stuff like our dress and our food. Now saying those are things that are tangible.
Yes. 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 Certainly. Yes, Kevin. What do you want to add to that? Okay. Mm-hmm.
My hand was up by accident, sorry.
Okay, no problem. Alicia. Who's TJ? Who's that? The
That's me.
acronym. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say that similar to the sort of tangible aspects of culture, for instance, it could be anything from your built environment. So, the buildings or the architecture that we see every day that are influenced by our history, how we live, the ways in which we live, and what's necessary for that to be, accessible to us. I think that's like a good example of, a more tangible aspect of culture. But just because I think culture and the arts are mutually beneficial in that they influence each other, but they're not necessarily separate from each other because they're always in a cycle of influence.
Very good. I remember that point when we come to class next week or week after. Antonia, one last comment before I go. Go ahead.
Because I actually like the last point by Alicia. What I was going to say is that I would look at things like architecture and things like expression, which would to me fall under art because is a physical is an expression of the mindset of the people at that time. So if the people were into a particular type of building or they had a particular style of dress, I think that would be an expression, because to me fashion and architecture and things is a work of art, is you expressing your personality, you're impressing your interpretation onto something.
Indeed. And if we think, for example, of the ideas of when one look at customs and traditions and rites and rituals within the realm of culture, we sometimes categorize them by talking about artifacts, mentifacts, and sociofacts. So all the DCFA graduates will remember those terms. And within there, artifact is something quite tangible, not so? Usually is. Because that's that if we go into the context of Diwali or Ramlila, in terms of the preparation or even the prayers, we know that the urns, those are artifacts, right? And sociofacts will be the more intangible, the way in which you engage with each other, the acts and the rituals. And then the mentifacts will be the symbolism or what we take and reference from what may be happening between the artifacts and the sociofacts. So that culture, yes, does have some intangibles and tangibles. So that we have to move past P1. What about P2? We are told, or P2 was part of P1. No, that's another one. Arts are elements of the aesthetic products of culture. What do we think of this? Arts are seen as elements of the aesthetic products of culture. Yes, Kevin. Kevin, that was your definition. If that was your definition, you can't defend it, huh?
It was mine. It was mine.
You cannot talk.
No problem. No problem.
Tonya. You see, Julian stayed quiet and listened. Tonya.
I was just gonna say I understand that perspective, but I'd also, make the argument that arts don't necessarily have to, if there's a normative culture that exists and art comes about as a result of some sort of subversion or like an act against that culture, then it's not necessarily a direct product of that culture, but more of a reaction to it, I would say. So I think it's not necessarily like against that point, but more of a expansion of that point.
So am I to take from you that whilst because of the fact that art can sometimes just happen, it can just be a spontaneous outpouring of expression, it does not necessarily have to be derived from culture?
I think yes. I mean, sort of the idea that if something, what are the necessary, elements for art to be produced out of a culture, I guess would be that question, because I'm sort of thinking as, what are more reactionary art styles that come out of, not the current culture that exists, but like a subculture or a counterculture that comes out of that. Although maybe then that is a culture in and of itself. So maybe I've made my point redundant.
Is it possible that whilst it may not directly come from a particular cultural form or from a particular kind of culture, that in the spontaneous outpouring of the art itself, that may form a culture in its own right, if it becomes pervasive enough?
Yeah.
Dominique, Tonya,
Yeah.
wants to say that?
Yes.
Is that possible? I think we see a lot of that now. Not so?
To some degree.
Where the act of the supposed art is not rooted necessarily in any particular cultural form, but it becomes pervasive enough that it then creates culture. And I suppose this is how contemporary culture comes into being. Ava wants to say something.
I think a point, so Dominic was trying to, I think further to Dominic's point, is that it's sort of like the way that Satanism is a valid religion, even though
Sorry,
it's
say that again. I'm not
supposedly.
hearing you very clearly. Just come up a little bit, your voice.
Better now?
Yes, that's great.
Okay, so I was saying that to sort of further, I think it's Dominic's point, it's kind of the way that Satanism can be considered a religion, even though it's not a standard religion. I don't think that art can be created in a vacuum. I think it needs to be influenced by some sort of cultural foundation. I mean, I can't think of any example of art that exists without that influence. So unless we have feral children who create art without
Politics
being
culture?
Sorry?
Is politics culture?
There is a political culture, yeah.
But it's politics culture.
I suppose if you look at it as it's a byproduct of society, then yes.
Okay.
I believe politics is culture.
Okay. Okay. Because you see, the thing is, the point that Ava is making is that it has to be rooted in something. I suppose what we are contemplating is whether or not it's always rooted in culture. It's science culture. Because there is art that comes out of science. I mean, look at Da Vinci's notebooks. I'm asking. I'm here to probe, What do we think about that?
But it wouldn't reflect the person that creating it. Is that person, because everything that we do would reflect all our thinking, or how we think, how we socialize and everything. And I would think that if we engage in politics or we engage in science, it reflects often how we think, and how we think is fashioned by either by the culture or the society that we live, or the culture of the society we live in, or even another culture that we're fascinated with elsewhere.
Indeed.
It is always influenced, because these things have been done by people, not by robots.
Right,
and
right.
it will have to reflect something.
Yes, and so Ava's point about it being rooted in something is quite valid. And so Kevin's perspective holds an important consideration for us here in us trying to understand that nexus between the arts and culture, as well as how it may be a little distinctive from each other. So what about perspective 3? Because we accept what Kevin says there within the realm of the discussion that we just had. I should ask, did anyone dissent to that perspective? Is there anyone that outright disagreed with what Kevin would have suggested there? Yes, Ava. Did you, Ava? Or is it that your hand is...
I'm a little, I'm not sure about the wording of it, but I agree with the idea behind it.
Well, yes, because you are the one who further articulated.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to change your mind, Dominic.
So can we go back to this slide, please? I forgot.
That's no problem. Sure. Are you seeing it, or it has been cut off?
Arts are elements of the aesthetic products of culture. I disagree because I wouldn't necessarily say that art is just outrightly a product of culture, because I feel like they both have some level of dependency in some, because okay, this is my reason, like, where do subcultures come from? where where do individuals have their subjectivity, and how does that impact these other things? Because we could look at someone's subjective piece that might not necessarily fit into the current framework of a culture, but yet still it could influence that culture, change that culture, make that culture go all around. And then we could say, well, what's really directing? What is art really leading culture? Or is culture really leading art? So that was my perspective.
Well, I believe, was it Tonya who made the point quite early on? And that's how we got to the place where we were talking about whether the art could emerge quite spontaneously. I think we did agree that it may not always be a direct byproduct, but we recognize that culture can spawn the arts. I think that might have been the slight adjustment that was made to it. Is that correct? Are we still all on the same page? Because that's how we got to the discussion of talking about how contemporary culture probably emerges, because there's some arts that just come out of nowhere, not having been directly influenced by what currently exists directly, but in their becoming pervasive expressions, then going on to forming new cultures. And in a sense, Dominique, that speaks to your question as to where subcultures come from. Yes? What about P3? Culture. Agreed collective practice by which one or many can be identified, and arts is what we practice. What about that one? Tonya, Kevin, your hand is still up, or are you going to comment on this one?
My hand is not up.
Right. What do we think of that one? Is that coming closer to home in any way? So culture is agreed collective practice by which one or many can be identified, while the arts is what we practice. Is it? Do I have that correct? Because I'm seeing the word practice there. Did I misquote you, Quasi? Agreed collective. I see Kevin's hand is up. Go ahead, Kevin.
Why is my hand keep going up? It's not up, but anyway, but I'll talk even though my hand wasn't up.
And Ava's hand is up. I don't know if she...
Yeah, I don't know what's going on, but as I'm here, yes, culture definitely is the agreed collective practice. But but I'm not sure about the second part of it in terms of the arts being identified as what we practice, because I think we also practice culture.
Right.
So yeah, so that part of it I'm not too sure about, but the first part for sure. But I think that we practice culture too.
Yes, Esther, go ahead.
So again, just like Yvonne, I agree with the first part of it, but I feel like art is more of an isolation of aspects of culture that we kind of take a microscope and zoom into. So, for example, I know Derek Walcott and Rex Nettleford, they usually like to take simple practices and examine it in the scope of, can this be it's something cultural, but can we also find art in it? And one of the examples that they use would have been a cricket game.
Yeah.
So when we think about, for example, the way a cricket match happens and that whole ritual of it, we could agree that collectively it's part of our culture if we use that definition.
Right.
But if we isolate a part of the cricket match, for example, the way a bowler would bowl, the movements in his arms, the way that he will launch the ball, you could now narrow in and take that action.
Song drop or what?
Is everybody hearing me?
Yes, I'm hearing you. Is everyone?
So when you isolate that part of the cultural practice, then I think we could look at it as something artistic. So I feel like art is an isolation or derivative of a cultural practice.
All right, we coming to come. We getting somewhere. Yes, Patrian, I'll take yours and then we go to the last one.
I agree with piece three. I agree with the first part that culture you said is an agreed collective practice, and I'm deciphering from the rest of the literature by which one or many can be identified art through what we practice. So it sort of speaks like that's what I'm deciphering from it. That he's saying that yes, it's an agreed collective practice, but it could be identified through the arts in which we practice. Like for example, our culture, soca, the way we move, our carnival culture is only indigenous to the Caribbean, most of Trinidad and Tobago. So that's what I deciphered from that. It felt like it was missing some words.
Yes, but yes, I think we've still been able to have a rich discussion on it. I do believe there is the takeaway from it, just as we have discussed. Definitely, a culture is about an agreed collective practice. But if we say arts is what we practice, full stop, we might have ourselves in a bit of a problem there by just seeing that as the full stop there in terms of our understanding or our conceptualization of the arts. Yes, Patrian and Kevin. Two last and then we go in again. Oh, it's Tonya. Go ahead. Speak.
Yeah, so to define the arts, I guess, like I understand the term practice, but I don't know, practice sounds so, I don't know. It sounds very boxed in, I guess. So like I would say then arts as more of an expression of some sort of sentiments that might be shared by a culture or some sort of cultural idea. And I think maybe then art would also have to include some medium that needs to be expressed through, whether that medium is the body, the voice, whether it's a painting, all these different types of arts that we talk about. It requires some form of medium to be expressed through, and that might reflect the culture, essentially.
Yes, very well said. Alicia, your comment is us, and we go to the last one.
So I'm thinking of how to articulate this. I'm having an issue with the agreed collective practice. Do we all does it have to be collective? Does it have to be agreed upon?
Well, yes, in some respects. You now remember, as Dominique posited before, we have subcultures. So there's some kind of agreement among some group of persons. You see? So that within Trinidad and Tobago, there are some things that are, culture across the board, I suppose. But you have a lot of subcultural elements, would you not say? And they become subculture because they're shared among a group of people. The size can vary, but the shared is an important descriptor in there. Yes, Eva. I said that would have been the last one, but yes, Eva wants to respond to that.
Sorry,
No,
I just want to say that I also disagree with the agreed part of that definition, because I think subcultures only exist because there are people that don't agree to that collective practice. So
sorry,
why?
because subcultures.
I think subcultures come about because there are dissenters to that collective, to the original or the more normative collective practice.
Right,
I think
but the ones who are practicing the subculture agree on it.
right. So I think subcultures are agreed cultural collective practices, but I don't think cultural in the general term is a agreed collective practice. It's a collective practice, but not
That's
necessarily.
interesting that you should say that. I want you to contemplate that just because it's called a subculture does not mean that by any stretch of the imagination that it's small.
No, I'm not at all talking about the size of it.
Right. So the point of the idea of agreed is still there. So Rastafarianism would have come out as a subculture.
Yes.
You see, the bikers, the ones who are on the bikes wearing black and chain and whatnot, the skinheads, you see, so that there's an agreed to thing inside there. The idea of shared or agreed does not have to mean that it's that broad macro. You see?
Okay, so let me just clarify. I'm saying that as I agree that a subculture is a collective practice that's agreed upon by its members. Yes? I am saying that culture with a, let's say, a capital C, I don't think it's necessarily agreed upon by the people who practice it.
But what is culture with a capital C? This is becoming interesting.
I'm talking about a like holistic. Okay, so you can be born into a culture and disagree with it, and then you can go on to form a subculture or become part of a subculture.
But it's still shared. That's like splitting hairs.
No, my point is
That's like saying the ice cream is not a cold dessert.
No,
Or
my
the
point
yogurt,
isn't.
yogurt is not a form of ice cream, kind of thing.
Okay, my point isn't on whether it's shared or not. My point is whether it's agreed upon or not.
Oh, I see. Well, the thing is, for me, it's about the same because if you're sharing it, but you don't agree on it. You agree on it, but you're not sharing it. Which one is the part that you don't necessarily see to be so? That is agreed to but not shared, or is shared but not agreed on? I just want to be clear.
So it's shared but not necessarily agreed on.
Oh, that's interesting. So, for example, like what?
Okay, let's take something like child marriages. That's a collective practice in a lot of countries, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the people who practice it all agree to it.
Or like that.
We could see we can. That's part of culture, yeah.
Right. So you are more thinking in terms of the socio-political side of it. Okay, fair enough. All right. I
Or it
can't
could be
say no.
it could be as simple. It even have to get political. It could be like people. I hear people in Trinidad just boil rice and put salt in the rice. I don't agree with that practice, but apparently it's part of the culture. So it don't even have to be political.
But the point is, though, still, Eva, for those who would practice that, that is shared and that is agreed. You see, to my mind, I understand what you're saying, but at the same time, you still have a group of people who would be sharing, agreeing, and operating within that realm. The first example that you gave in terms of the child marriages, I can concede to that. I can certainly concede to that. I mean, that is a socio-political construct. In the context of what we're discussing here in class, which is of course arts and culture, not in the broad distinctions of it, but certainly in terms of what the course will be very much concerned with, in terms of what then ends up being cultural commodities and goods and services. Within that, you will find that the culture, as was said, it's shared. And then if and when shared somewhere inside of there is an agreement within a group. And as we know, sometimes subcultures become so pervasive that they themselves become cultures in their own right. For want of a better term. But I am someone in our contemporary times, when I look at it, I sometimes find it challenged to make the distinction between the subculture and the culture, because of the idea of rapid dissemination or pervasiveness, as I was saying before.
Mm-hmm.
But I certainly accept what you said about child marriages, because that is a point. There are persons who have to practice but don't necessarily agree with it.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anyone else who wanted
some
to?
other people had their hands up.
Yes, Tonya, Dominique.
Yeah, Tonya.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I definitely see where Ava is coming from in the idea of like the term agreement requires like some sort of level of you have control of the situation. So I get the idea that culture can be something that is in some way forced upon or forced to be like you have to assimilate into a culture. So therefore it requires some level of coercion, even though you're agreeing to like the contract, but it requires that level of coercion because you don't have, some sort of cultural or social power within the hierarchy to define what the culture is, essentially.
And I suppose when you think even in terms of corporate culture, when you study corporate culture, that is also one of the key issues that is raised. People who work in an environment, but they don't necessarily subscribe to the corporate culture. We have a lot of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I can definitely see like it was,
it's kind of culture,
but there. Yeah.
Sorry?
No, did I drop?
A little bit, but go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, I can definitely see that idea with like corporates, like any sort of construct where there's a hierarchy of who gets to define what the culture is, creates tension, and then from that we'll get the subcultures and the countercultures and whatnot. But I get the hesitation to use the word agreed because it's really who gets to agree to it.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. So let's look at our P4. What do we think of that? Culture, both are intangible and tangible, and arts are the expressive outlet of culture. This was whose definition again? This was Tonya's, was it? Or was it Alicia? Who advanced that definition?
Patrian, that's me.
Patrian. Right. So what do we think about that one? Last but not least. I think it was Alicia. I'm trying to remember who made the point about seeing arts more as expressions. And I think that this point resonates with that. And I want to agree with that. And to say that for me, if I consider the arts to be expressions of, then I can consider the arts to be seen in terms of what I call P's. Arts as practice, arts as pedagogy, arts as productivity, arts as performance. But in all of that, the arts are expressions of something. And it may be that they're expressions of culture that already exists, or in arts being practice, pedagogy, performance, productivity, I can even put process there, new cultures may be born. Can we accept that perspective? Is that something that you could give consideration to? I feel as if. Is everyone here with me still, or did it drop?
Yeah, I'm
Yes,
hearing
I
you.
am here, but I am at the explanation. Just go over the
We
summative
can't
part
see
of the
the
explanation.
screen. We can't see the screen anymore. Well, at least I can't see the screen anymore. See yours.
And it's sharing, you know. That's the thing. Let me try
I'm seeing it.
resharing.
We're seeing it.
I yeah, it's
Yeah.
good.
Are you
I
seeing
I
it?
like P4. P4 is I have no issues with P4 at least.
Sorry, you have no issues with
I have no issues with P4.
P4. P4 kind of hits it.
Yeah.
Antonia, are you seeing the screen again in terms of what's being shared?
No.
Perhaps you should go out and come back in. That's strange because it is being shared.
Okay.
What are you seeing? No screen at all, just our thing, our little boxes. Okay, I think she went out. Oh, sure. I'm not hearing you now. Try going out and coming back in. Is everybody else seeing the screen? I just need to be sure.
Yes, I am.
Yes, I am.
Yes.
Yes. Yes, I am.
No, I'm not seeing it. I just seen darkness. Don't know why.
That is on your end. I think that you should go out and come back in.
I just went out and come back in. Let me do it again. See if it will.
Okay, no, just now. I now have to reshare it. Hold on. I now have to reshare. Don't go out. Tell me if you're seeing it now. Everybody seeing it again?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
No.
I don't know.
I
All right.
Yeah, tap on your
That's
screen
on
and
your
see if
end. Your something is off. Camera, something like that is off. Sometimes
I could see you. I could see your picture, but I cannot see your shared screen. So I am seeing your profile pic, and I could see the chat. I could see everything else except the shared screen. But I would just
Check and
go
see
along.
if
I
you
would try
haven't
to follow.
pinned. Check and see if you haven't pinned that screen.
She has to do what?
Check to see if she hasn't pinned it in error.
No.
Or what you can do is turn off the machine altogether and come back in, because sometimes that happens as well. Reboot your machine. I know they often tell me.
if you're
If
on
I
an
have to
iPad,
reboot it, it will take forever for me to get back in because my computer is slow.
That is also part of it. Okay.
So I would just listen.
I will send the I'm gonna send you all the slides anyway, and the lectures recorded. Most importantly, I hope you will be able to access. So that's the part I'm concerned about, that you will be able to access the recording off of the chat. All right, so let's go again. So just to close off, I was saying that P4 gives us a very comprehensive view of it, in the sense that it seems to take on board what was said before from 1 to 3, and in a sense reflects the discussion that we just had. But what I find very important there for me is the idea of arts as expression. And as I was saying, sharing with you, when I think of arts as expression, I like to consider these P's that I came up with. And arts as expression for me, I think of arts therefore being arts as practice, arts as process, arts as pedagogy, arts as productivity, arts as performance. And my argument there is that regardless of any of those P's that I look at, as I believe it was Eva who might have said in the first instance, it's always rooted in something. But I also give credence to the idea that in any of those creating something new, they may very well go on to generating or creating new cultures. So I suppose Bob Marley would be a good example of that, because when he was creating his music, art as practice and I suppose performance, it generated a whole body and enhanced, I suppose you could say, Rastafarianism, to carry that message all over the world. And we know that a subculture would have strongly emerged out of that. Um, and I suppose we have many more examples of that happening in our own Caribbean context and globally. So that if I start with the idea of arts as expression, I feel it helps me to have an understanding of how art can relate to culture. It can stand on its own, how culture can inform art, and how art can sometimes inform culture. What are your thoughts on that, class?
I agree.
Yeah. Anyone else? Any dissenting views, or the discussion is healthy. We learn that way. Anyone else, or is that good?
I agree, and to add to it, it goes. I can't remember the name of the article I was reading. Culture sort of reinform art and culture both reinforms in a sense that where society probably would have lost or find themselves in losing parts of a culture, the art tends to add to reinforming the society of the culture that they had. So it sort of adds or creates a reinforming process.
Right. Yeah, agreed. Agreed. So if we look at the next slide, what that basically shows to us is a representation of, I suppose, our first discussion when we contemplated culture. This idea of culture as a way of life, and then we broke it down. And I always like this particular breakdown because it usefully shows one of the ways in which one can identify culture in its various elements, and then to give examples, specifics, so to speak, of what each of these things might mean: tradition, custom, language, cuisine, history, and so on and so forth. And then from there, I want to make the point that in looking at culture, we know of the traditional views of culture, which we would have discussed before, which is what is represented on the green slide. But then we want to have a sense of other notions of culture. And I feel that in our discussions, we begin to give an idea of culture. And certainly when if one goes back on Ava's discussion about culture, and I think someone even mentioned countercultures, we recognize in the literal sense that the idea of culture just being about aesthetic cannot be the only point of departure that we utilize in terms of understanding or philosophizing on culture. And so we want to look now at what some of those other notions of culture might be or could be. So let us first look at Raymond Williams. Now, Raymond Williams is a sociologist, and he was always very concerned about culture. He was the one who said that it's one of the most complicated words in the English language. And he felt that if one had to really break down culture, we would recognize that we had to depart from the idea of culture just simply being about beauty and goodness and aesthetic. And I will send you all a copy of the reading that would allow for you to examine Raymond Williams's thesis. I believe it's already scanned, so it's just a matter of placing it on the platform and or emailing. And what Raymond Williams argued was that apart from us accepting and seeing culture as a way of life and the idea of culture as simply being about beauty, that culture had two other forms. Agriculture, meaning the culture of the earth, the culture of the land, was a culture in of itself. How many people appreciate that perspective? Agriculture being a form of culture.
Yes.
I never looked at it that one.
Jamie, what did you say? You never thought of that?
No, I said yes. I appreciate that definitely. Agriculture.
Yes. Ava and then Tonya. What were you saying, Ava?
I was saying that I kind of have a first-hand experience with that because when I was living abroad, I remember I was like walking through the countryside and I was thinking, oh gosh, this place real pretty boy. How they get it so it looks like almost sculpted. And then I had to go back to my memory of, science and plant and biology to understand that it was a completely different climate I was in. So the way that their landscape would be different to our wild natural, well not natural, our wild rainforesty kind of landscape. And while I was there, I had a whole conversation with myself where I was thinking, how is it that I can't walk through Trinidad and feel the same sense of awe or inspiration, I guess. And I realized that I had a bias towards a certain type of look or aesthetic, I suppose, even in agriculture.
Yes, that's one way. Correct. Thank you for that. Tonya, you were going to say something.
Yeah, similar to Ava in that sense of, I think of the like landscapes and environments are obviously part of culture, even though we might not think about it as often because we're more, in this sort of quote unquote modern world where we have buildings and things like that. But the foods we eat, the crops we grow, how we how we take in landscapes, the fact that we live in a tropical climate are all, part and parcel of culture because it impacts how we, like our daily lives. Like, clothing is impacted because of the culture we live in, because it's hot. We live in a hot climate. So, things like that are all connected. Yeah.
Yes, correct. And there's also, which Tonya started hinting at a bit, there's also the relationship between the person who tends to the land and what that person is seeking to yield. That too is a culture. There is a culture that goes around those who tend to the land, who farm, who grow food. You see, so the idea of culture as agriculture is to be seen in the way in which we were just exploring in terms of its aesthetic value, its beauty, the way how it naturally presents itself, but also in terms of how there is this relationship, the practice of tending to the earth. There's a culture that goes along with that. The way in which we grow food, the way in which we yield food from the earth. Okay, so Raymond Williams advances to us that that is an element of culture that seems to get glossed over when we talk about a way of life and customs and practices and tradition. Yes, we know it's a custom and a practice and a tradition, the way how we may grow food such as rice and provision and these things, but we don't usually identify those kinds of things with regard to agriculture when we speak of that. Yes, we see food as part of our culture, as we see identified on the green slide. But when we are talking about food, we don't talk about it in terms of the process of yielding the food from the earth. We more talk about the food when it's prepared for us to eat. Not so? In terms of culture. So agriculture for Raymond Williams requires a distinction as an element of culture that should be defined and conceptualized as a key element. He also sees culture as a form of behavior. And by form of behavior, he talks about, well, I suppose one could say, why does this keep doing that? By form of behavior, we know we talk about a cultured person. Have you ever heard that term?
Yes.
Yeah.
So by
Yes.
yeah, so by form of behavior, Raymond Williams is referring to the idea of a person being cultured, whether that means a person who subscribes to a particular ethnic group or practice and therefore carries himself following all of those traditions, or cultured in terms of protocols, when you know how to sit and put the, which fork to use first and which spoon to use last, and how to greet the president and how to greet the queen. Raymond Williams recognizes all of that as another element or aspect of culture, as a form of behavior. Within that, of course, one can see where the idea of customs can emerge, not so? Because if culture is a form of behavior, it means that it is expected that we will do certain things within certain contexts. So, for example, if you've ever been to Hindu prayers, if you must greet the pundit, you have to, what is it you usually touch? Is it, I'm trying to remember, is it his knee? There's a part that you usually touch. I think it's his, whatever he may be wearing. So the idea of form of behavior is supposed to suggest that culture can be seen in isolation as, not in isolation, sorry, that culture can be seen as having this particular element that is worth focusing on, worthy of focus. And then of course, culture as practice. Let's hear you. I mean, I think this, it's interesting that that should come up as one based on the discussions that we had before. Not so? But the idea of culture as practice is what? Tell me.
Kind of who we are, what we do, going for doubles, lining, as we spoke about earlier. Those are part of being a Trinidadian. Even something as simple as standing by the road and eating the doubles as part of culture as practice.
Eating with your hands is part of a cultural practice. I know of people who come here to study, kill them dead. They eating that doubles with a knife and fork. Don't laugh. So yes, yes, but also, can we consider that when we talk about culture as practice, for those aspects of the arts that do derive from culture, can we see that as where the culture links directly with the arts? I believe Julia wanted to say something.
What I wanted to say is that practices, I mean, you can also look at it from the perspective as it relates to like wedding traditions or even funeral rites,
Yes,
that sort of a thing.
that's right. That's right. And and traditions, like you had wake dances, not so?
Yeah.
Yes, yes. So there's so
Yes.
so we are seeing where culture as practice, we've identified about two things there, and some of them are contemporary. But I'm also positing to you that that is where we can give consideration to where culture sometimes directly links to the arts. Where when we talk about culture as practice, we can also give reference to arts as practice, or the aspects of the arts that represent um, cultural practices, so to speak. Someone had their hand again. Julia? Okay. And last but not least, before we go back by this art as practice, what about culture as a signifying system? What do you think Raymond Williams could possibly mean by that? Culture as a signifying system. It's like half the class gone to sleep, everybody gone.
Is it like a way of identifying one individual as being part of a certain culture? Maybe how like I could listen to you and guess that you're Bayesian originally or something like that because of your accent or like in that way? Or the way how people tend to say, well, Americans are a certain way or Chinese people are a certain way.
So
Is that what you
yes,
meant by it?
that's one aspect of it. That's like an example. But if you had to conceptualize it, have you ever heard of the term representation? When you within cultural studies, when you try to analyze what things might mean. So when we talk about culture as a signifying system, we are giving consideration to being able to look at aspects of culture and give an interpretation as to what they may mean for a body of persons or a group of persons or for society as a whole. It's more like that, and we tend to look at this within cultural studies in the context of contemporary cultures. So yes, you're correct, Ava, in the general stream of things, but give consideration also to contemporary examples. So for example, how girls may behave in social media when they're posing. What do we normally see? What was that?
Ooh.
Right? So what is, yes, Kelly is saying, what are you saying, Kelly? I thought Kelly was speaking. Yes.
I'm saying tush-ish. I'm wondering if you're coming back to the high culture, low culture discussion then.
You
This
can
one ratchet because of how she posed, and this one bougie
can
because of how she has posed.
you can come there, though. I mean, I wasn't using it specifically in reference to that, but just to say that signifying behavior is that after a while, within a particular context, you see people doing particular things and they have a meaning. But we also notice in tradition how they said when our ancestors were on the plantation, the way in which the women tied their headpiece had a meaning. Y'all are aware of that, right? Usually in the context of
Yes.
rebellion, it was to give the signal that it's time to let loose on that plantation and overthrow and run away and what have you, right? So signifying systems that culture creates those as well, and they then become meaning. And we know, particularly those who may be familiar with the spiritual Baptist and the Baptist faith, that that tying of the head still continues to have varied symbolism to this time. That is part of, you could say, the culture within that group. Does that make sense, class?
Yeah. Yes.
Yep. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Tonya wanted to say something, or your hand just up, Tonya?
Oh no, this was like way back when you had like asked the question initially. I was
Okay,
just gonna, yeah.
right.
I think for me, like when I think of signifiers, I think the like most like easy example I think of is hand signals, like a thumbs up or like an okay sign or like even the peace sign and what it means for different cultures, because
Yeah.
a peace sign for us might mean like peace, but like for instance in like England where like if you accidentally turn it around it's a curse,
Yes.
things like that. So like signifiers and like some sort of action that requires understanding between individuals in that group and that is related to their cultural way of life essentially.
Yeah. And what we've just discussed there is the pleasant side of it. Because I think we are all appreciative of the fact that sometimes signifiers are also used against us. So the idea of um, Dove soap as being something to cleanse you and make you pure. And there was a time when that Dove soap was being, or Lux, was being advertised with what? What would normally be the image used to advertise this Lux or this Dove soap to represent pure and clean?
They used to show white
Yeah.
people.
Lighter skinned people.
Yeah, people.
They
That's
got it in like one of their recent commercials, I think.
That's right. My cousin-in-law recently put up one, and I think somewhere in Canada, not Prince Edward Island, but one of them places where it's majority white, and they apparently are pushing a policy where they are trying to minimize, trying to encourage families to have fewer children. And it's this big ad by the bus stop. And of course, you know who holding the child, right? You know, it's the image.
Oh god.
It's a black woman
Maid.
with with a child,
Nanny.
baby, no, the black woman, a child, and saying, let us something about having less children. But the irony of that is that where this thing is being advertised, they don't really have a lot of black people. They have like a 1-2%. But there is that idea that, of course, black people have a lot of children. So signifiers, cultural signifiers sometimes are used in ways against people. And they sometimes become, and it's interesting that Raymond Williams could have recognized this, because this Raymond Williams, that is way back, 1930s and all back then, to see that he could have identified what has definitely become a predominant part of marketing within the creative industries as well. But there is a book by Stuart Hall called Cultural Representation and Signification. Now that we're in this context, it may be easy to get a hold of an e-copy. And he chronicles this right through time, showing how various products and services that bordered on culture, in terms of cultural commodities, would have been used in particular ways and basically sought to marginalize subcultures and communities. So it's very interesting that Raymond Williams could have recognized that when we are defining culture, it's not only about the good parts, then, that in conceptualizing culture, we must give credence to the fact that sometimes it could also be about signifying systems, and that these signifying systems may not necessarily be positive then to all or for all. Yes, class?
Yes.
Any questions or comments about that before we go on? All right, so let's go again. So you would recall that we talked about culture as practice, as you're seeing there. So, and I made the point that in looking at culture as practice, here's where we can give consideration to how culture sometimes directly connects to the arts. So we know they're not the same, but we recognize that there's a connection between the arts and culture, and it's normally where, when we look at culture as practice, as we were able to discuss when we looked at our perspectives that we advanced in class. And so we basically have had this discussion already, and all that has happened is quite ironically, which is lovely, because I smile to myself and I say, look, I have a bright class already. Praise the Lord. So what you see here in these slides following here would be a discussion looking at arts in terms of those P's and as a signifying system and what have you. What I try to do here is to examine the idea of art in terms of some of what Raymond Williams was advancing, to see whether or not the idea of the arts and culture, how do they link? The idea of whether, the arts and culture do link. And so we have here as the first example, art as practice, which we've discussed already. And we were just talking about signifying systems. Apart from what we just discussed in terms of culture, one can certainly look at the arts as a signifying system as well. And we tend to see where art influences society by changing opinions, instilling values, translating experiences across space and time. And I think for me, whenever I look at that, I always think, for example, of countercultures, for example. Everybody still with me?
Yes, miss.
Yep,
And
yeah.
also, as a second point, in terms of the fact that as a signifying system, that sometimes are the repository of a society's collective memory. So for me and my experience in dealing with the carnival arts, doing the old yard. The old yard has become our repository in a sense of the traditional masquerade. And we do that through the arts, through the expressions of the arts, to keep with the word expression. Visual art, performing art, masquerade art. So this idea of the arts as a signifying system to me is a very dynamic consideration. And it helps me to see where how the arts can at times influence culture. What do you all think about that? Is everybody still seeing the slide? Patrick.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it does. Yeah, and I think um, the idea of signifying system helps us to even think about how sometimes art informs heritage and creates heritage. What do you think about that? Art sometimes informs heritage, art sometimes creates heritage. Jamie should have something to say about that.
I was actually going to ask you to repeat, but I'm now hearing what you're saying.
Yes.
That arts, what? Let me hear it again. Arts.
Art sometimes informs heritage, art sometimes creates it.
Yes.
I think your festival project would have been a very sound example of that. Katrina.
Yes. I'm trying to. Yes. Definitely. And that's where museums and all these other curatorial projects come in to play.
Yes.
Cultural inheritance kind of thing. Communities as well.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And it's you know what continues to fascinate me about the region is how we still don't give enough credence to this. We still don't recognize that we have a lot of important signifying systems that we need to advance. And I suppose, in a sense, this is partly why we are sometimes subjected to, for want of a better term, cultural imperialism. I'm not an old timer. I'm just looking at the issues as they are. So, for example, if any of have been fortunate to go to parts of Latin America or the Spanish-speaking countries in the Caribbean, they are very strong. They're very big on signifying systems. I remember the first time I went to
Yes.
the Dominican Republic, I was bowled over by that. The Ministry of Culture in the Dominican Republic is like from the Hyatt right down to the water taxi thing, and as far back as wherever the buildings for the Hyatt and the boardwalk are. That is the Ministry of Culture in the Dominican Republic alone. That one big building. And
Asian
when
countries are similar too.
right, you see?
Yeah.
And when you go into Santo Domingo, there's a part that they say, I have to believe them, is their tourism and is their heritage. This house and this set of houses is where Ovando, I don't know how many of y'all remember that part of your Caribbean history, where Ovando and Columbus would have rested when they came to the Caribbean and they discovered Hispaniola. And the way in which they have this thing set up is upstairs is where these bedrooms were these people supposedly lie down. And of course, they still have them made of the same place. And you pay some money to go and look at that. And downstairs is this simple shop selling all these bottles, these replica bottles that they say is what these men would have drunk out of. I bought one. You see, signifying system.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Did he really drink out of that bottle, boy? I don't know. But the bottle there, and I have a few of them. And they're all shapes and sizes. But of course, they are bottles that replicate that time when that was the kind of vessel that was used for drinking or pouring water or what have you. Signifying systems. Yes, Jamie?
Me no, no, I was drawing parallels as well to Panama and Mexico, as well as some of the other Asian countries with some of their artifacts as well. We have some of it. We should be able to find some of it locally, in terms of our First Peoples and the weaving, their use of weaving, for
Yes.
hammocks, etc. within
Yes.
the Caribbean in general.
Yes, but
I
it is
think
my
just
contention that it is not
Mhm.
pervasive enough. For me, this is an
No, it's not
example
pervasive.
of how a signifying system can be commodified in a way that still maintains its heritage and its essence, and at the same time does the job of continuing an important aspect of cultural fabric. So for me, this is where art continues to recreate heritage, if you see what I'm saying. So the art in of itself, the art maintains the traditions, but in maintaining the traditions as time goes on and new practices come into play, the arts creates new heritage forms. And we see that every year in the old yard, as a matter of fact. It's not likely that the sailor dance that being done now in the old yard is the same sailor dance that would have been done exactly the same way 10 years ago when Uncle Ralph and they were doing it, but it still is recognized as an important dance movement to go with the costuming of the sailor mask, at least in the context of the yard. Yes, Tonya, you had your hand up for a while.
Oops, sorry. No, I just left it up. My bad.
Okay, Patrian.
Hi, yes. As you spoke about Panama and Mexico, it reminded me of Grenada, where they have the Big Drum Nation Dance Festival they normally have every year in Carriacou.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
They
I've heard of
actually
that.
they actually have it's like a huge signifying system combined with, it's like a whole combination, a conglomeration of everything, where you would find a lot of things retained as it was 50, 60 years ago, but you will still find an evolved form of it alongside it. So
Mm-hmm.
yes, so that I will always tell anybody, any Trinidadian, to go and experience that, because we actually had we had a similar thing here, but a lot of the elders died out. So there's
Okay.
one person I know used to have it on Central, but she does. I think she's really old now, but that is one um system that I know I could really speak about, where the art creates the heritage, and then the heritage creates the art, because there's actually art in the tying of heads, which ties into what you're
Mm-hmm.
saying. Well. And
Right. And even with your point just there about persons dying out, art preserves what fact-based historical records or
mhm.
people cannot. And so we have opportunity through the arts as a signifying system to maintain and to preserve our history and our traditions where and when it is not possible for our elders to remain with us. And again, this is something that we have dropped the ball on somewhat across the region. Um, by extension, we do not give a lot of credence to a lot of informal or what we call community museum. So I don't know if any of you have ever had the experience of going to another island and bouncing up this older person who has collected all kinds of things that are in their home, that are reminiscent of times gone by in that particular island. I had that experience in St. Kitts. There's a gentleman there, his entire home chronicles St. Kitts and Nevis's from independence there right up. The thing is unbelievable. Newspaper clippings, things when the Queen first come, and what funding this man gets? Nothing. And so we have a way in which we still really do not understand the importance of signifying systems to our continued preservation of our culture. And even in seeing it as an avenue of viability for the arts. Right, let's go again. Art as a form of behavior. So art is communication. Art allows people from different cultures and different times to communicate with each other via images, sounds, and stories. And I think that is so true now in this contemporary time of social media engagement. We see that daily, and we see even the merging of cultures. In an ironic way, this point is what would have gotten that poor fellow, what he named himself? Oh gosh, I can't remember, that poor guy that got himself in trouble talking about Whining, WHINE.
It's white chocolate.
Oh Lord, yes. I can remember his name. Poor boy. Right? Because we've reached a place where there's such a collapsing on account of social media that we've reached a place where in some persons' minds there's no distinction as long as they have been able to access and they have been welcomed. If you can appreciate what I'm saying, class. So that even when using that example, he found himself on this panel, but in my mind, I said, well, how he reached there? But anyhow, he there. You know, his discussion with them, he at first really did not see anything wrong with what he was saying because he has not been able to see that distinction since there would have been that blurring, and that would have come on account of social media. That's where he exists. He's a social media influencer. So it's very interesting to see when we talk about art as communication. No, I don't know if he sees what he does as art, but we know that that is part of our culture. And we also know that we have dancers who practice or who engage in that form of dance. Of course, we've seen that take off with the soca industry taking off. Machel Montano, in particular, having a lot of backup dancers in that regard. So it's interesting to see how this one person, art is a form of communication, utilizing this and building a career to the point where they see themselves as the center of that. Comments, class. Nobody, everybody has gone.
This reminds me of that there was it brought spoken word to mind, and it reminded me of that art that I can't remember if it's in which ministry had it, where they use an artist to do a piece, a spoken word piece on consent locally.
On conference.
Consent.
Oh, true.
Yeah. I
And it
think it
was a
was one of those popular what's his name? Kyle. Is it a Kyle? Somebody I can't remember his name, but he had a whole piece on what consent is and isn't, in terms of when it came to like to gender based violence against
yeah,
women.
Kyle Hernandez, more than likely.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right. So what were you saying when you said reminded you of that? In what regard? I don't remember the piece.
So he referenced doubles. He said that consent is like doubles. You wouldn't force a doubles in somebody's face. And if they tell you they don't want a doubles, you're not going to slam it in their face and say, look, eat a doubles because I buy this doubles and therefore you can't tell me no, you don't want this doubles. I buy the doubles for you. So
Yes, remember it now.
at that point you have about art as a vehicle for social change. That is what reminded me.
Yes, the point number 2, which
Yeah.
I think is very important. It's a very and I see us in the region increasingly going in that direction. I always give a lot of credence to the younger members of our society in that regard, for taking up that mantle from the Calypsonian who would have started it.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that because it's traditional for us, or like our oral tradition is about
Yes,
social change.
indeed. And I actually was happy to see that, through the Bocas, it got picked up on. And it's such an important aspect and element of that, because that form of art to me helps where we might fall short on the signifying systems, because it helps to reinforce, and at the same time it gives opportunity for the new voice, if you see what I'm saying. Yeah. So the idea of art as a form of behavior, again, allows us to consider the new ways in which art can inform culture and, of course, impact on society. And of course, we know art as a way of life. Oh, there's a typo. We'll fix that. So tell me, Art as a way of life, because we talk about culture as a way of life, but what about art as a way of life? What
And
examples do we have of that?
hello.
Yes, Maria, go ahead.
My Microsoft, my team not allowing me to raise my hand, but I wanted to add something to the last
Yes, sure, go
point.
ahead. Where it does not just make your intervention. Yes.
It was about art as a form of communication. I was gonna say that I think that it's interesting now that meme culture is now this booming thing in Trinidad, where like we kind of communicate through memes, and we kind of have like these reoccurring images of persons or notable people that we would have seen in our media when they say something funny or incriminating, and then like we kind of like pass that along, and then everybody kind of gets the quote unquote inside joke. Does that count as art of the form?
Yes, yes. What do you all think? I think so. I think because, and you know what, for me, I find that fascinating. I use those kinds of examples you just raised there, Maria, as a form of intersection to me, where the Caribbean, like at this point in time, I like to talk about how, because of COVID, we are living in our future. The future is now. And what I mean by that is that anything that we articulate or contemplate towards our resilience, whatever you action now, it has to be that you are giving strong consideration for what is down the road. But even as I say that from a strategic standpoint, when I think of how we have engaged with the virtual environment, like you're talking about the memes, I see us doing that. So there's that traditional side of us, which is Trinidadians always like to make jokes of serious things. Do you all know that of yourself? Am I correct? Or is Dr. Tal telling lies?
It's true.
The
We
true is truth.
Like the more, you see, I just had to be respectful, right? I just had to respectfully put my submission because I don't want all you to go and write the Minister of National Security to put me out. So I
As
just,
No,
Roxanne
we would
speak
probably
on,
just make it
Roxanne
into a
says speak
meme.
on.
so like the more serious it is, the more ridicule all you go give it. And I think the word is pick on. Yes, right.
Yes.
Roxana said it.
Yes.
Pick on. Right, right. And here
I
it
think
is.
it's we have like laughing at our pain, like so we
And
deal
here,
with things
right.
that are very serious. I don't
Yeah,
know, like
that's right. And here, like, I remember when this gentleman passed away the other day, God rest his soul, from COVID. I saw people post, oh God, so who we gonna put as the meme now? Y'all know who I mean, right? It's like the man passed away, not God his maker, And all you studying, who are you going and put there as the meme now? And then you know what somebody did? They did a meme and show him up in heaven. I said, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy. But
I
the
really
most
love that meme.
Eva, but you see, the more serious it is, and that is engaging with an aspect of, well, I don't want to say future, but certainly know that we are going more and more towards the digital. We will remain in a digital world, not so? So something traditional of you, the more serious it is, the more you all go make a joke and make fun. And here it is now, we are utilizing the digital, the technology now to further perpetuate that tradition or that way of behavior. So when we talk about art as a way, and certainly when we create them, are we not creating art? All these young people and whoever are making these things, we know that this is an aspect of graphic art. It's called digital art, not so? So,
people also found a way to capitalize on it where they use these memes as a form of marketing. Like they would like make a funny meme about a show they're trying to promote and kind of put it in a way where it comes across as a funny joke, but then really and truly they're just putting it out there that this is the thing, and
to
maybe
promote, to make it
that
pervasive.
make it popular and people be talking about it and get it into the atmosphere. There's also a smart marketing tool as well people use.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
you see? So art as a way of life, I think is something that we can look at certainly in our contemporary context. And I am intrigued that all of the examples that we use so far have bordered on what would be the contemporary scape. Are there any examples of art being a way of life that are not necessarily bridged or platformed on a digital context that more falls in the traditional realm? Art as a way of life. Is there any arts practice or anything that can be seen as a way of life that makes that direct impact on society? Anybody?
Perhaps like mass in carnival,
Mhm.
having a direct impact on the way of life. I know um, it's so much a way of life that some people like build their entire life around carnival season, but specifically mass and mass production and wire bending and that type of stuff.
Yes, I would certainly agree with that. Again, Jamie's project comes to mind. I'll let me hear Janae first before I further that comment. Go ahead, Janae.
I agree with this point of art being a way of life. Art does impact and influence society, especially in terms of music. I mean, many people may not agree with this point, but like when you're listening to like Trinidad dancehall, as we call it, Trinidad,
Yes,
it that does have an influence on a certain part of society, like So
it
I
does.
think that I agree with this point.
You will be talking to Miss. That's like the preacher talking to the converted. During the COVID lockdown, I decided I wanted to test out doing online ethnography because I kind of figured that we would have been inside for a while. And I have a cultural research course that I teach at undergrad. And so I wanted to test it out to see how I would have them do it this semester. And at the same time, when I came on this bright idea, I have to figure out this thing. These Zest parties started online. Anybody been to a Zest party? Has only
Yes.
Miss been to a Zest party?
Nope.
Oh, what trouble is this?
No.
Miss
Yes,
Carolyn,
yes,
with your next
yes.
time you're
I
going
Yes,
on it.
yes, yes.
yeah. Hello. Hello. By a show of hands, how many people here have been to a Zest party? I have my hand. Eh, eh, two people? No man, miss. No man, miss can't be younger than all you. Nah, nah,
I
nah,
don't
nah.
I don't know if 5 minutes will
I
count.
have not
Miss, you
attended,
gotta
but I
carry
have
me
had
with
I
you next
have
time.
been able to
I
hear
want
it. I didn't go to the
everybody
party, but
comment.
I heard it.
I want everybody comment. I started with Ava. What you say, Ava? Let me
I'm
hear.
saying you gotta carry me with you next time.
When I go link here, literally
Agreed.
link here.
Already.
Everyone, what you have to say for yourself?
Who me? I good. I love. Yeah, I good. I good. I have partied enough. I don't even party anymore. My days of partying done.
Not
So I
even
will
if
let
it's
you all
not going
enjoy.
to investigate. Jamie,
No,
Take your
I'm saying
guy.
I didn't attend it, but I hear it.
you
My
hear you
neighbors do
hear
it.
the
I
vibe.
hear it. So I don't attend, but I hear it.
Maria. Kelly.
Y'all just
Maria,
say
what
take
you have
your
to say?
Gary. Take your Gary and all, you know.
Next thing you know, he come and but she gone to Ireland, so I should be
Gary
okay.
has gone on vacation.
She
And
gone
I
to
say you on
Ireland, so I
vacation.
should be all right for now.
We
It's
safe.
now
We
time
safe.
to confess.
Ah, oh my
But you know, go on the point that Maria made, just what fascinated me about that, apart from what she said about reflective of people's life. They talk about life imitating art or art imitating life. I don't quite recall how the saying goes. But it is also that the art generates new cultural norms. So what I was investigating in the Zest was the language. The Zest has its own language. So if you've been to a Zest, you know what a mama bird is. If you've never been to a Zest, you don't know. If you've been to a Zest, you know what is to run out. If you've never been to a Zest, for you, run out probably mean the house on fire and you're running out.
Um,
And these are
Dr.
terms. These are terms that are
Oh,
used
where's that?
inside the Zest. When you see people say these things, they have a particular meaning. What's that?
Dr. Toll, where's that mama bird? I wanna.
Well, I go tell you
I
later.
find that
Up here.
vibes there. I wanna know
Tail
what that
and
is.
legs. These are terms that have meaning. Pegs and legs. They want to see some pegs and legs.
Well,
So the point about art, sorry, sorry, you can figure out that one. Pegs and legs. I did some investigation. I understand that long time before us, the generation over me, they used to talk about pegs. So apparently, like that's a comeback thing. So it's but it is twinned with legs, I guess, because pegs rhyme with legs, so it's easy. But the point is the language. So you started to have now a body of slang now within your district. Now Trinidad has slang, so you have what is in Cote say Cote La, but somebody need to either update Cote say Cote La or say the 21st century Cote say Cote La, because Trinidadians do have a lexicon that goes beyond that. Some modern slang has come out. You know, they talk about things like domestic. When a fella have a domestic. I don't know if you all know these terms. If you sometimes I do this. I sit and I listen to the radio and I just note these terms because they're very much tied. They're very much tied to the entertainment industry and understanding how some aspects of your arts and culture become your local arts and culture become commodified. And you hear it in the soca sometimes. But that Trinidad music, it's there. A malandro, you know, it's a malandro. You know, so these terms, it and these things are part of life now in that world, as Maria is saying. So this is where art now begins now to inform some people's way of life, so to speak. Any comments or questions to that? Oh, yes, someone knows a mama bird?
Dr. Thal,
Yes.
I think well, I've been a facilitator of the zest because I do a lot of artwork for them now, especially the
Right.
Pegs and Legs series that was online that had nothing with tech songs over the over the
got to share some of your artwork. Let us see. Right. Okay.
over the couple of months, right? One thing that's very interesting though is that even the colors used in said artwork. For instance, if your zest is organized by Rasta City, you can't use blue, you can't use green. There are certain things, certain codes. It's real weirdness, a real.
But if I
ticklish.
may say, that harps back to our Afrocentric traditions because, and even in the Hindu tradition, because colors have meanings for the faiths that would have come with our people. And that's a very interesting context. What I often find fascinating, and I am saying this, I'm willing to be corrected. I see where our young or our contemporary society, because we are not often schooled, and remember, we were just talking about signifying systems not being as strong. They do things, but they don't realize that what they're doing comes from somewhere. They didn't just wake up and they decide to do it, you know. Whereas in other cultures, one may see where it comes down from generation to generation. And even if it's contemporarized, they have an understanding as to why it is they're doing what they're doing. Do I make sense there, class? Do you appreciate what I'm saying there? And I find that quite fascinating. Yeah, I find that very fascinating. But yes, thanks for that contribution there, Maria, because you know it is also how that genre has exploded in the context of the COVID because of that online. Their online parties were more exciting than the soca and whatnot, save for Voices online concert. You know, a product of the CFA, if we may all boast. You know, because I looked at the numbers and I found that too to be quite fascinating. And I said, so what makes soccer so difficult to hold people's attention, um, to 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 garner that kind of community online? And you know, people behave different in a soccer zest to the zest. I find that so fascinating. There's no bad behavior in a soccer zest, you know. It is proper English and thing inside there, you know. I watched that. I was very fascinated by that as well. You know, so art really is a way of life. It really does influence in some very interesting in ways. One final comment before we go on. We're almost finished. Dominic, you see the time? Ain't we going good?
I don't know.
Dominic sound like she in a party, you know. This is like when you're having a good time.
Yeah,
I
that.
say, you see the time? I say, good. Yes, Kevin, go ahead.
No, also because we are so heavy, we have been heavily influenced by American culture. So even with the gang culture here, it sort of harkens back to like the Bloods and Crips of their
Gotcha.
wearing certain colors. So they these young ones may not even know about the Bloods and Crips, but you know it sort of comes back to where we pick things up from. So they would
Gotcha.
have had a system. So that is what, yeah. Yeah.
Got you. Got you. I accept that. Patrian?
Um, Hi. Yeah.
Yes.
I have a few points. The first one, we speak about this desk culture. The soca culture has changed because even the language and the idioms that they use now. I remember in the 90s when Super Blue and a lot of these artists used to be singing in the early 90s. The language and the words they used, it was different, and you wouldn't hear a proper English word with, like, you wouldn't hear hand, but you hear hand. And I think probably Iowa is probably the same artist, the only artist that probably still uses the, I could be wrong, but still using Trini vernacular when he sings, one of the first ones. And the other thing I was what you touched on, and it just took me into my cultural research part. The Zestin thing, I lasted 5 minutes. I couldn't stay longer than that. They don't know that they actually sitting on something that was actually here before them ancestrally, because the same areas that they come from, Rasta City and Africa and these kind of things. Back in the day, a lot of the spiritual Baptists, or they like to use the term Shango Baptist, which is incorrect. When they come in from these areas, they used to wear a significant color to identify who was from where when they would come and they would meet together. Probably
Right.
even know that sort of thing. Because there were a lot of Yoruba people in Gaspro, so Gaspro, they would normally wear red from down here. So they actually sitting on a lot of their own heritage and culture that they don't know, and people
That is a
probably
very strong point you've made there.
and it's sort of there unconsciously. When I saw that whole lesson thing, I was like, this is a repeat of something from the past. It's like they're subconsciously, but they don't know that they is there.
I feel that way too, but because I'm not from Trinidad and Tobago, you know, I continue to play with it and you know, like a piece of clay, so to speak. I went the angle of the language because that jumped out at me the most. But I know what you mean. I see a lot there, and you know, I said, gosh, boy, I wish I had that training. You know, I've recorded them, so I have promised my colleagues in Jamaica who do research on dancehall, one of whom you will meet, Dr. Sonia Stanley Nair. She'll do a guest lecture with us. Um, you know, they said they'll take a look because it is fascinating. I mean, I've been to the dance hall in Jamaica and I see similar things, you know, and I wondered if they were harping on that. But the thing is so Trini, for want of a better way. I know all Trinidadians don't identify with it, but you know, the language and the way they speak and what they be talking about. You know, when I went to my first online soca party, so soca is uptown class. Has soca become uptown? Let's hear you, Dominic.
It'll be to some degree. It has.
Everybody buzzing up, ready to talk. Yes, has it?
Well, I find so to some degree. To some degree, it has because it's so interesting. Like a lot of people in the West tend to gravitate to it. So I mean, like, if the 1% is really on soca, that just says a lot to me.
So people in the ghetto don't listen to soca again?
But I mean, I'm not saying no. I'm not saying that they don't. I'm just saying that soca has evolved into something different. I think it's more inclusive. So I guess it's like really hardcore mainstream where, I don't know.
So that soca is becoming gentrified. We'll meet that term next week. Where's Kelly? Kelly gone. We were talking about high culture and low culture next week. When she
But
mentioned
that's just it. No, sorry.
Yes, Kelly.
That is, I'm sitting here and I'm wondering what has determined that it is now, well, high culture instead of low culture, and what determined it to be low culture, because it was always a part of who we were, and everybody always kind of listened to it, So now that it is more available and high and low cultures actually meet in the same place to party or to zest or whatever.
I ain't sure about that, Kelly. I ain't sure everybody meeting in the same place, no?
Yes, look at Carnival, look at Panorama, look at
everybody ain't meeting in the same place at all.
Panorama is uptown.
Everybody outside.
I think
everybody in the same place. Sorry.
Even if we
sorry, I was
let me start to referee now. Okay, Kevin, Ava, Jamie. Yeah, I'll remember your order. And then Kelly will come back in.
Okay, so me?
Roxanne up there, Lord mercy. All right, Kevin, go. We will let Roxanne for the other anything recently.
I find it really interesting that you spoke about soca becoming uptown, because I have a lot of Jamaican friends. Yeah, well, right. And I have a lot of Jamaican friends, and in Jamaica, soca is uptown. So people who are uptown listen to soca, and people who are uptown do not listen to dancehall the same way that people who are downtown do. And I think here locally, I think there is a certain aspect of soca sort of becoming an uptown thing, and I think that has to do with the type of way that we party now, in terms of the all inclusives and all that kind of thing. So the sort of ritual of carnival being an expensive thing to take part in has sort of priced certain people out. And a lot of young people I know don't really identify with soca. I mean, they would take part in carnival, but they don't really listen to soca like on the radio and stuff. They are more into the zest because they more identify with that. So I think there is probably not a great separation, but there is something that is starting to happen where people feel like soca may not really be for them, and it's more of an upscale leaning thing.
Right. Roxanne, you can come in here and then I'll go back to the others. Where is Roxanne? Roxanne getting some feedback. Let's go by. Okay, yes, Roxanne, go ahead. Oh, we're not hearing you. Type in the chat. It's coming out kind of muffled. Are you all hearing Roxanne? Is it me or?
No, nothing. No.
She's muffled.
No.
Yeah, you're muffled. Okay, let's go by who was it, Jamie?
No, Kevin said what I wanted to say.
Okay, Ava.
I mean, all I can really do is expand on Kevin's point, but I just wanted to highlight that soca may be becoming uptown now because it's becoming more mainstream now. And yes, it could be the way how carnival and the way how carnival has evolved and become so commercialized. It's no longer about the rebellion of carnival. It's about the person who could afford to take part in carnival at this point. So I think I can't remember who was making the point. You can say now that yes, everyone enjoys soca, but that definitely was not always the case. And even carnival, the 1% didn't agree with carnival, and they tried to shut down carnival in so many ways. And panorama becoming what it is now. Remember that panorama started off as things that the ghetto boys and the gangs and them came up with out of Lavantil. So it definitely wasn't accepted across our entire society. Now it's become like that, and I think maybe that has given rise to the lesser subculture simply because the masses no longer have that that art form to identify with.
Uh-huh. Okay. Esther.
I think so. When you look at the type of people that will go to certain events, you could say, okay, yeah, everybody enjoys soca, everybody goes to fets or whatever. But a truer form of identification is when you examine the culture of a neighborhood. In certain areas, because I've lived in these areas, you're not going to hear soca blasting. Even though you might find a majority of the band players coming out of Port of Spain and Laventille and areas like that, you're not going to hear soca blasting. Look at simple things, and we touched on gangs before. Look at the names that we pattern gangs after. In the 2010s era, all of the two major gangs were Gaza and Gully, and it wasn't because they patterned themselves after Iraq, you know. It was because they patterned themselves after what was happening with Jamaican culture and dancehall culture in that moment.
Yeah.
Because that was the big thing in Jamaica. It was Gaza versus Gully, and then you had the garrison jumping out. And if you pass through certain areas in Port of Spain, you will see it written on the walls. And before that, you had what we call in Rasta City now, used to call themselves G Unit. So they were patterning themselves after the American hip hop culture. And that tells a lot about where your local music is appreciated, how much influence it has in certain areas like that, because in the more recent times, maybe within the past 10 to 15 years, there was no segregation of these areas patterning after soca music as you would find the patterns happening after dancehall music or after hip hop music. So that is just my 2 cents where influence and music is concerned.
Before I just want to make a slight contribution here to say that I have long made the point that I'm not even sure, and I'm saying this quite controversially, I'm not even sure if it's a matter of choice for those who are in the marginalized communities or in the ghetto. Because when one looks at the average cost of effect, the man on St. Paul Street, he really could spend our money on going to party, boy, he and the whole crew. Can he even leave St. Paul Street? And therefore, in a sense, because we know the preference of music will be dancehall in these areas, and it will be the Gaza kind of dancehall, does attending the soca party then become a desire as it did, say, 20 years ago when I first came here? I remember everybody up Laventille and he used to go soca fete because that's how I used to get to go to the front. They will lift me and carry me because I knew them. So you don't have that person coming out of these marginalized communities now necessarily wanting to go into a fete. And I wonder if it is to do with crime or if it's economics. Because of course, there's no Wassa fete price now. There's not that. The average party, I think, is a 300 or 350. So I don't necessarily agree that, we are partying and playing together. Roxanne, you wanted to. Oh, look, Roxanne is saying the same thing. Even in the same party, we're not partying together. There's VIP and there's even VVIP, she's saying. Who else wanted to speak? Patrian? Oh, Quasi. Quasi wanted to come in and
Well,
then.
I disagree totally with the soca being uptown and just being downtown. That's the first thing. I think that is more of because soca is seasonal, because the soca culture in Trinidad, especially seasonal, after Ash Wednesday, that's it. When I was coming up, I never really looked around down the soca thing. I think it's more of an age thing. I think it's very much the party, the heavy party culture right now is the youths and them. So you won't get them just not on that soca thing except for carnival time. I don't think that there's a and also there are no fetes catered to but in the majority for the grounds. There's only army,
But that's what I was
Chinatown come and full up, and Jam Nation kind of get a little rough now, right? But other than that, there are no fets catering to the grounds. So they will quicker stay in the zone. That's how this happen. They'll quicker stay in the community. They will have the soccer thing, but just we don't really hear about it. You know? Understand? Some just start saying, areas just have the things, but it's just that we won't really know because they don't really advertise it on the ground. So I don't think that there's a soccer uptown, this downtown. Understand? I don't think
that's interesting. Patrian and then Jamie.
Yes, I agree with Kevin. Some of the points that he made, with there's a subliminal separation with the types of way that we party. I make this observation that there's some slight difference in the way people party in South Trinidad to the way they party in North Trinidad. I don't know why, but it's just there. Then I think
some people go to parties like if they're going to watch cricket. They go early. That's my observation. That's the only observation I have.
Yeah, I noticed that there's a difference. And then I also think that that the portrayal of the artist is something that contributes to the culture of these parties. Because the songs that they sing may appeal to a particular certain sector of persons as opposed to another person. So I'll use Bungie as an example. When Bungie first came out, Bungie was somebody who was like the voice of the ghetto. He was singing like about the issues in the ghetto, the issues of the person who living at the grassroots level, and his lyrical content appealed to that class. So like these I like to want to use the term grassroots. I don't want to use any other demeaning thing. So like why we call it grassroots? I think some people mentioned already, like licensing, army, fire pet, Wassa Grass Festival.
All the as I used to say.
And these fets is where he would have a following, and you pay $150 to go in, sometimes $100 for a ticket. And that is where you would see it. And now you wouldn't see those particular crowds anymore because ticket prices, one, I think it was mentioned before, went up. And then two, his lyrical content has changed. So his audience has changed because now his lyrical content shifted to something, I like to call it neutral soca because it's kind of like soft soca. You're singing a beat and soft.
Lord, I learned today in class, neutral soca, you know. All you hear that?
It's
neutral soca, she said, you know.
Because you're trying to make it acceptable for everybody, but you're not really representing a particular class or form. And Calypso was actually something that was created out of resistance, and that was the voice of the persons in the barrack yards. I think that is what Calypso, soca, and rap was created from. So, like a lot of these artists and their evolutions actually added to that line being created. I actually see a line because I've been in the industry for like 20 years. So I could see an evolution with some things like Bunchy have a little soft now, Benjai get a little soft now. So you would see it with a lot of artists, even Menace, who was a part of Three Sons. All of the lyrical content adds to that, and it created another way of life and taken away from one other way of life.
And I am so glad you said that, because in all our discussions, I wonder to myself if all of this did not exemplify when we were saying that art is a way of life. Because in all of what we were saying, you just kept hearing as you all gave the arguments and the discussion, how this idea of art being a way of life, you're just seeing it from various angles, how the art has influenced society. I didn't even hear much of society influencing the art per se, but it seems to me as though the art becomes the vehicle by which to express what is going on in society. And then in some kind of way, the art then seems to further impact on society, whether it's a subcultural group or whether it's society as your whole. What are your thoughts on that, class? I had some hands up. I don't know if the others wanted to make a comment on that.
Before I address that, I want to go back to what Ava, I believe it was, said, and Kevon, right? I wanted to give us some historical context. We mentioned earlier that we see these zest parties and we suspect that they are repeating something that was there before. In our carnival, we definitely are with the uptown and the downtown culture, because I don't know if people would know in the 1800s or so, when we had the separation of carnivals, uptown, savannah, and whatnot, everybody in the uptown culture would be on the lorry trucks. We have now converted that to music trucks, but look at our music trucks now with all the additional levels and the parties, the extra parties that go on top of the music trucks while they are on the road, etc. Right? And the whole roped off version of the band.
And
There's
even
that.
in the parties, the idea of the cabanas.
Yes, exactly. There's that. So this is not something new. It's a new way of doing it. It's a modern way of doing it, but it was existing since back then, since they had that separation of uptown and downtown carnival, right? And I think that is where I always thought it was oxymoronic to have a uptown and downtown carnival committees, two separate committees for the same carnival. But then I understood why when I looked into the history and what brought it on, and what enabled the masses, what we call in our persons who from the ghetto now, to participate in the carnival was the advent of competition. So when the newspapers, the Guardian newspapers, the Argos newspapers brought in the competition and introduced that aspect, they wanted more it was to encourage more participation of the masses, so to speak, right? So we bring it back to our context now, to what we see now with the zest parties, the younger people, and the VIP all-inclusive parties, etc. There's a correlation. It's like a cycle. We've come full circle.
Yes, indeed.
Full circle, and it's So right, that was what I wanted. That was when Ava was talking, it sparked. It reminded me of that, and I wanted just to bring that as a culture, as a historical context. To the latest thing what you just asked again. Sorry, I forgot what we were supposed to go on.
I was just making the point. I was saying that, when we look at all of the discussion that we had there, we saw numerous examples of how art is a way of life, and we see how the art seems to impact on society, and we see where, in a sense, the art generates new artistic forms in the society, and society is impacted on, and the society may inform the art again, but it seems to me that a lot of it is that the art continues to be the enforcer in terms of how society may shift. So I was just putting that out there for debate.
Yes, I see that if we take the same ZESA and the VIP all-inclusive parties as the examples, as the notion of art, if we use them as that, you definitely see how the art is influencing society, because now to participate and to attend these same parties, one, you have to spend money, you have to fit in, right? So now you will morph. So for example, if I were to go at Zessa party, I can't dress how I usually dress to go at the all-inclusive party. I have to find a way to fit into that crowd.
No, you wouldn't get in.
Exactly, I wouldn't get in. I know I wouldn't get in. I would never dare to try and go. From me just saying hello, they're like, where's she going? You know?
Where is she going? Not where she goes. Where is she going?
Exactly, where she feels she going. So I wouldn't even care. So yeah, so in a
and we see it in how the music, how the lyrics are crafted, and I find these are some very interesting things, and where I am going, in the sense that a lot of this is what brings us to contemplate the idea of art being a basis for productivity, because if we can say that art is influencing society and art has a way of shifting things, even though we see some cyclical trends, it would seem to me, and especially when we take on board Kwasi's contribution and some things that Kevon mentioned in the context of Jamaica Carnival, it would seem that an interesting part of that way of life is the economic way of life, because it seems as though it allows for a commodification. It seems to allow for a space of commercialization. It seems to something that we'll meet next week that Throsby speaks about. It seems to me that it locates the arts and culture then into an economizing framework, because it presents it now as so trendy. It offers opportunities or provides ways then for money to be made. And I think Quasi, given the example of his experience of doing work, gives an example of that, right? Because at the end of the day, he is a visual artist, he has his business, he is a producer of digital art, and this zest, yes, he could put all of the most glorious and beautiful images that he wants to, but green is green and blue is blue, and don't get tied up. Not so?
Right.
There's certain
Yes.
images that will be expected there, and certainly not like what Avo enjoyed when she was abroad, that lovely countryside. I don't think Quasi could put that. So it's and the point is, it's because the images have to perpetuate the idea of that way of life. The art has to perpetuate the way of life so that the money could be continued to be made. Comments, and then we will wrap up.
And the producers of the zest, they have to have certain songs, certain tones and stuff for the producers behind
Yeah.
it. Would you know that the majority of those zest songs are produced by one person, a young lady? I forgot her name. Baby, I think is her name or something like that.
There's the girl who is the DJ, the young
The girl
girl.
who I'm not sure if she DJs, but I know she's a producer.
Well, what's his name? This boy started as well. Oh gosh, what's his name? The one who did the song for Marshall and them. Who did the song that didn't?
I can't.
The young boy.
Do some of the work, but I didn't know. I didn't know that in terms of the producer. But again, certainly, it reinforces the point that we will come to next week when we talk about cultural value, like whose value and value for whom. Kevin.
I just wanted to make a comment on what I think Eva was saying. Was it Eva when she was speaking about
I heard
when she was speaking about
all right, yeah.
all right, about Bungie, how Bungie has evolved from being the voice of the underground, and I mean you see that with a lot of art that comes from that place of struggle and stuff like that. Once money is involved, money is involved, it the entire message changes, because now they have to sort of identify more with the mainstream where the actual money is. So I think that is what has happened with a lot of things, and it means Zest will probably go the way of that in the next 20 years as well, when it starts to become very, become more mainstream and people start to get more money for it. Correct. Yeah. Gentrified.
We will learn that term next week properly. Yes, Janae, and then Tanya.
Okay, so I actually work with soca artists firsthand. So I know for a fact that soca artists no longer make music to appeal to a Trinidad market anymore.
Yeah.
Because plenty of them feel rejected and not appreciated by our locals. So now we make music to appeal to the international market, because that is where, after Carnival, that's where the money is. And in terms of like getting out there, like record labels will not acknowledge or recognize our traditional soca like in the original form. So they have to commercialize it, or they had to commercialize it in order to appeal to record labels, the people of the higher power in international countries, the masses. So maybe that plays a role in the uptown and downtown. And the second point is the media has a big part to play in the uptown and downtown as well, and soca being seasonal. Because if you look at the urban stations, they push dancehall, hip hop, everything else but soca after Carnival. So yeah.
But it's interesting to hear that the idea of commercialization rests with not finding innovative ways to push your indigenous sound or your indigenous voice. Like, I wonder what happens with African music. I want to check that. I've never really, and even with dancehall, um, because there was a time when, in line of what Janae is saying, the dancehall music had to be sanitized to have gotten those deals. And now, to me, the dancehall has gone right back to a place where the dancehall is the dancehall. And even to me, in some respects, there are certain hip hop artists that try to mimic that culture, so to speak, like the Cardi B's and what have you, you know. So it's interesting to me how the idea of commercialization means that, or requires you to step away from what may be your indigenous sound or voice. Am I correct in that interpretation?
Mhm.
Jenny? It was
Yeah,
really
I think you are. And I think that Trinidad dancehall is going to go down that road sooner or later, because to be realistic, like I've had this conversation with many industry people, and we don't see anything long term with Trinidad right now. So it's just for a phase, and like everything in music and culture and the arts, change is inevitable. So change will come, evolution will come. So we just have to wait and see where it goes.
I think it will be here for a while, though. I actually disagree with that. I think it will be here for a while. You see, especially how you have no carnival next year. Where's somebody? Tonya. Oh gosh, Tonya.
Yeah, I think Janai honestly summed it up really well. Similar points I was going to make, which is like, if we're talking about music, as the sort of example, like I feel like the closer a music form is to its original roots, the less palatable, like the less digestible it is for a mainstream audience. So like when we're talking about soca, I'm thinking of what are the different types of soca and what makes that more accessible to the more mainstream society, if you want to. So like I think somebody was saying like earlier, it has to like I think groovy soca, like singing soca, like more soft, or like the
Groovy.
ones that people
Groovy.
want to listen to that more, like people like from Westmorelands and thing want to listen to that more, as compared like, say for example, like jab music like from Grenada, like that won't play in every single fete. It won't get the most plays because some aspect of that music is like deeply rooted in a cultural sort of feeling and expression that I don't know, like people won't necessarily want to relate to it, or can't relate to it, or won't relate to it, I think is the sort of distinction there. And because it's less relatable, it becomes less valuable for people to either want to commodify it or to commercialize it in that sense. So yeah.
And there are examples of that. When you attend Crop Over in Barbados, or you go to the carnivals in the OECS Islands, you would find that a lot of what would be considered the hits, the local hits, will play up and play frequently and in rotation up until the week leading up to that carnival day comes. Then there is a heavy infusion of Trinidad soca. And that's because by that time the market has started to shift. You'll still, and what they will pull from the local will be whatever is considered the local, the best of the local, what may be considered palatable to the ears and what they could dance to, because in the case of Barbados it's also that. Well, if you're into Trinidad music, then you will be able to dance to our music, right? But the fact is, mainstream, they find it really hard to dance to bashment. That's what we call ours, bashment soca. That's like, what is that? I've heard Trinidadians say, but what in the hell is this? So that your point is very valid about palatable and the idea of commercialism and mainstream. And we will come back to this next week, class. I want us to remember this segment of our discussion. Not that we will be deliberating the point, but we're going to interrogate that some more within the theoretical context of understanding notions of cultural value. You see, because when we take that on board, it helps us not only to understand why we choose what we choose, but also why we are led to choose, because it's an important part of understanding how commodification occurs, and how it is that we could arrive at talking about commodity, cultural and creative commodities, and stuff like that. One last comment, and let's just take a look at a bit of homework. You know how the parents do it. You get the huggers and the lovers, and then you get the medicine. And so we had a lovely rich discussion, and now we have to deal with some homework. Anybody has another comment to make? Thank you, Kevin. This has been a good class today. I do agree.
I
All
just wanted
right.
to make one last point, John.
Yes, Eva, go ahead.
We're
Sure.
talking about commercialization, but maybe our artists don't have much of a choice, huh? Because I mean, I honestly believe that great artistic work comes from having like some sort of struggle. Look at Adele's album, for example. She don't make that good music when she happy and happily
True.
married, living her
True,
best
dear.
life, right?
Here.
So if you think about
I didn't even recognize her voice. I have to agree with her. I told her to listen to
right?
it. I hear a song there. I said, what? That is she singing? She sound like, don't let me say that.
When you
Somebody.
think about like our grassroots artists and the fact that they find this is a way for them to express themselves, their lifestyles, and just the things that they deal with. And it might be it's shared by people in their community. They sing for the people in their community. They ain't singing those songs aiming at the mainstream, right? But
Yes.
then in order for them to get out of that struggle, which it might
Yeah.
not have been their original goal, but if someone comes and offers you the opportunity to elevate your lifestyle, not a lot of people will say no.
Yes,
Even if
indeed.
it means you have to turn down
Mm-hmm.
your artistic style, if you have to tone it down or become more palatable or appeal to a certain crowd, not many people. And I think it's probably unfair to expect them to say, nah, I go in and keep singing in slang or whatever the case may be, So I'm not sure, and I think there's this elitist mentality when it comes to art,
Mm-hmm.
that also spreads over to in our local scene where we think, well, okay, well, soca wouldn't make it big unless they understand what they're singing, but that's not true. Kaiso and calypso has been popular for years internationally, and our calypsonians don't really care too much about being understood. White people still dancing to calypso and they understand one ass singing. So I think we have the idea that we need to appeal to the mainstream, but then we have so many examples that prove us wrong, that who we are as a people, we are good enough and we are acceptable as we are right now, but we don't accept that ourselves. And so we try to change our image to fit what we think other people might want. So
Yes.
the mainstream might be our fault.
George Lamin, the Barbadian author, once said, how can I make my art and eat? And I believe
Yeah.
that the context of that, if I remember that particular lecture that he gave, was talking about the fact that he wants to be the creative that he's respected and recognized for. But if he is to consider that he must make his bread, he may be asked to shift and amend the content of his writing. And I don't know how many people know the author, but George Lamming would have migrated to Canada. But he did very much continue to write in the vein of his well-known book, In the Castle of My Skin, which is very much about a young boy growing up in Barbados in the 19 whatever that would have been. And of course, it's a lot of dialect and it's all a descriptor of how Barbados was. And there were issues in there of class and economic disparity and that kind of thing. Um, so that still remains a problem, an issue. How do I make my art and eat? And therefore, how does society treat with this? Because I think we are all aware that the society still has a very close-minded perspective on the arts and culture. Yes, they're happy for it, but when one starts to think about what the arts and culture does do and can do and ought to do for the person who carries that arts and culture, that's a whole different story altogether. There is the assumption that you're supposed to be grateful. There's the assumption that you should not want to do much beyond what you're doing, and you definitely should not want to drive a Mercedes Benz or a Range Rover, or you should not want to travel wherever. You know, I mean, even when you look at our crisis right now, the arts community has been severely marginalized by this. And it's the sector that has been greatly impacted. I mean, the place is not open yet, and they are the ones that are directly affected by the place not being open, so to speak. No, I'm not saying that's more important than health, but I'm saying that if you look, there are no strategies in place. There's nothing that has been put on the table to say, okay, the fact that this is happening, this is how we're going to do this, right? The leader indicated there's no carnival next year, but in that same breath, there was nothing that says, and don't worry, we have a plan of action that we want to discuss with you as to how we're going to treat with that. I haven't heard it, but I sometimes could be deaf, you know, but I know I have not heard it. And so when one thinks of the arts and culture operating in the context of society such as this, it begs the question of cultural value and what that means, and whether or not the idea of cultural value is a sliding scale and what influences those things. So class, we are going to pick back up on that strand of the discussion next week. I want to just turn your attention to this particular journal article. I do want that you would look at this particular article here by Langer, Art as Culture. It's on JSTOR. I have placed it here like this that you will be able to trace it. And of course, you're clicking on the read online for free. I believe it is still available. As UWI students, you should have access to JSTOR, and you can try and see if you can get on it directly. It may ask you to put in your library, so you would put the University of the West Indies, and it should open up the JSTOR for you. You will also take a look at this YouTube video. I believe this is one that's a TEDx talk where she talks a little bit about arts as culture. And then these are some questions that I want you to contemplate on, particularly as we go towards our next class, where we will look at the idea of art, culture, and value. And this is really to give some contemplation of you as the artist, as that person that either creates art or is a vessel of culture, however you may see yourself as a creative or as a creative entrepreneur. And that will help you. I'm going to email the PowerPoint, Antonio, don't worry, right? And that is going to help our discussion, help to guide our discussion next week when we do look at the idea of cultural identity and cultural value. Right. Thank you very much, class, for this very rich discussion. I had a good time today. I don't know about you all. Where's Dominique? I just want to show Dominique is 9/11.
Yeah, I see that. I know.
Did you
Wow.
all have a good time? Did anybody go to sleep?
No, I'm fine. I enjoyed it.
No, not at all.
Yeah, that was fun.
That's good. It was really good.
Right,
Yeah,
class.
it
I
was
don't want to
interesting.
admit it, but yes.
Never thought you could be in a 3-hour class and have so much fun. Eh?
Good.
You could have asked the first cohort, they would have tell you. And imagine when the guest lecturers come and thing. Huh?
It's so long since I was a student. My goodness.
Oh my goodness.
Felt strange.
And it doesn't feel like it. That's the idea of grad school, you know. It's supposed to be a little different.
Yeah. Yes.
Right, great. I'm glad it was good. All right, class. So just some quick housekeeping. Antonio, don't worry. I'm going to do two things because, as I said, I want to test this platform to be sure it's working for us. So I am going to place the recording will go into the platform automatically. I have no control over that, but I am not only going to place the PowerPoint lecture into the platform, I will also email it to you. I will also place here the Raymond Williams reading, as well as I believe I may have, I think there are about 2 Raymond Williams readings I will want you to have. So I'm going to place them here. I will also email them. During the course of the week, you will receive the course outline as well as what, boy? Yeah, I think that will be it for now. And then next week, we will resume again at 6 o'clock, and we will look at those 3 pointers that I have on the slide. So you will be reminded of what we will be discussing next week. Okay, class. Until then, you all have a good week, and I'll see you all next week.
Good night.
Bye, Dr.
Good
Have a
night.
good
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
You all have a good week.
See you.
Bye-bye.
Good
Bye,
night. Good
everyone.
night.
Good night.
See.